Today, Ukraine's Air Force says that 9 Russian jets were destroyed in explosions at an airbase in Crimea, which is under Russia's control. This could indicate a significant escalation in the war. Moscow denies that any of its aircraft were damaged or that any attack took place. Joining me now are Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor during the Obama administration, and the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, Admiral James Stavridis. So, Admiral, Ukrainian officials have not publicly claimed responsibility for these explosions, but they're poking fun at Russia's explanation that munitions at the Saki Air Base caught fire and blew up. Where do you come down?
Well, Andrea, as you well know, there are these things called satellites, which have extremely granular capability. They can tell you exactly what's on the ground. So for the Russians to claim that the jets weren't destroyed, I've seen pictures of it all over the internet. They're accurate. Given the endless surveillance, it's foolish on their part to try and claim otherwise. Kind of reminds me of when the flagship of the Black Sea, the Moskva, was sunk. Same kind of lame explanation. This is a big move. Taking out 9 aircraft is important, but it's also psychologically important. Crimea is a bastion of pro-Russian sentiment, such as it is in Ukraine. And so probably this is a special forces, potentially coupled with long-range fires. Very good day for the Ukrainians. And I'll close by adding, way up north in Europe, Sweden and Finland are getting closer and closer to joining the alliance. Joe Biden just signed their passage here in the United States. We'll see those 2 nations join soon. So overall, pretty good week in the war in Ukraine.
And Admiral, let's talk about the strategy on the ground. Are they pushing towards Kherson, trying to regain more territory so maybe they could get into talks at some point? Because they're right now, they've lost about 20%, I think I heard you say this morning.
The Ukrainians, are indeed preparing for offensive operations in the south. Kherson will be key to that. It's kind of the gateway city, if you will, to Crimea. And certainly President Zelensky, emboldened by the continuing success of his forces, is talking more and more about actually ejecting Russia from the territory that they hold. That's going to be a very difficult thing to do militarily, but psychologically, again, just like the strike into Crimea is important, if the Ukrainians can take back Kherson, that would be a major psychological victory and a geographic one, given that it kind of controls the water supply and the key routes into Kherson.
Now, Ben Rhodes, on the other hand, a U.S. official telling us that Russian officials have been conducting training on Iranian-supplied unarmed vehicles, drones, weapons-capable drones, as part of a deal for Iran to transfer UAVs to Russia. So this could be an ominous threat for Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, it's introducing or at least advancing a different capability for the Russians. However, I think it also does point to their shortfalls, the shortages they're facing in technology because of export controls and sanctions that have been put in place. I think their preferred partner in terms of supplying additional military technology would not be Iran, which is not a first-tier military power. It would be China, which has supported them in some ways with purchases of oil, but not with the kind of military backfill that Russia needs. So I think what you're seeing also is reports, Andrea, of Russian civilian aviation having trouble getting spare parts. We've seen this happen in Iran under sanctions as well. So on the one hand, it does potentially introduce an additional drone capability, but I think it also speaks to the fact that Russia doesn't have very many places to turn in terms of replenishing the stocks that it's utilized in Ukraine. And that's in contrast to the Ukrainians, who have a steady flow of weapons coming in from the West and from the United States, most recently this week with an additional $1 billion drawdown of weapons for Ukraine. So in the long run, there are reasons for the Ukrainians to think that they might benefit from the current situation in terms of the sanctions and the capacity to restock weapons that are being used in really brutal fighting in eastern Ukraine.
And Ben, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, says that there is some damage at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear plant in all of Europe, after that weekend shelling, but that available radiation measurements continue to show normal levels at the site. But this is clearly worrying. We don't know what's going on there. We don't have eyes on there. The nuclear inspectors aren't on that site. And the Russians are using it as a fortress for their artillery.
That's right, Andrea. I mean, there are two things, two of many things that are worrying about this. The first is what you need is for international experts to get access to facilities like this to make sure that there's not a risk of the leakage of radiation and nuclear fuel that is in the midst of shelling, in the midst of a Russian offensive. And that leads to the second point here, which is that the Russians are using this as cover for their attacks on the Ukrainians, which, again, prevents the kind of good maintenance that you'd want at a nuclear plant like this. So I think this merits continued international focus, attention, and pressure on Russia to stop using this for cover and to allow access to experts who can make sure that there's not a risk of the civilian population in Ukraine and in Russia, for that matter.